Now session 7 is sponsored by Geofabrics, the innovation and local procurement essential to a sustainable supply chain. At a time when geopolitical relationships, growing environmental focus and pandemics are reshaping and impacting our social fabric, supply chains and capacity, it is becoming increasingly important that our industry starts to consider its procurement practices. The role of utilisation of local content and innovation are central to the ability of Australia and New Zealand to deliver against its infrastructure pipeline while ensuring that the products and services we utilise and how we utilise them drive increased social, environmental and economic outcomes both for the short and obviously for the long term. This panel explores the challenges being experienced and the opportunities that would evolve from adjusting our approach to procurement in the infrastructure sector. I'd like to introduce the panel. Phil Davies, who is the Chair of the Australian Logistics Council, and Phil will also be the moderator for this panel. Denise Grech, CEO and Managing Director of Geofabrics. Cyril Giroux, who is the Head of Sustainability at Wholesome, and Alison Price, Managing Director of Soil Cyclers. Please welcome your panel.
Where do I need to sit? Just over there? Just here. Morning, everyone. Just check the mic works. Hopefully, we've got Dennis online. Can somebody confirm that?
I'm online.
He's right in front of you. Oh, there he is.
Good morning.
Thanks very much, Ron. I think what we'd like to do in this session is really pick up on that call to action from a few moments ago, but also through the session tell a few stories as well, as that video from Transport for New South Wales did. So we've got I've got some questions I'm going to ask, but also opening up to the floor. So please think about the things you'd like to ask the panel. Just setting the scene. It's kind of like, it's ironic for me today that we've kind of got two words or phrases that have been commonly used at the barbecue when we're allowed to have them. Sustainability and supply chain are two phrases that really have risen to the front of mind for bad reasons in the last couple of years, and not least today. We're going to focus on both, and particularly around supply chains, which, as the chair of the Logistics Council, we've been very busy for the last 2 years responding to the COVID pandemic and dealing with issues like border closures, dealing with keeping toilet paper on shelves and things like that. So supply chains have really become front of mind. Within sustainability, how do we actually embed more sustainability within our supply chain? So we're going to explore that with some real life examples from the panel and the experts here. So I'll ask each of you if you could first of all just maybe introduce your organisation and where you kind of fit in the ecosystem for a couple of minutes, and then maybe let's kick things off in a positive way. What's a great success story that you could share with us today? Maybe Alison, would you like to kick off?
Sure, I'm happy to start. Hi everyone, my name's Alison Price. I'm the Managing Director of Soil Cyclers. We started 13 years ago, and we're all about making physical, chemical and biological changes to soil and waste to turn the waste that you have on site into a product that you need to use, ideally on your site or one of your other nearby sites. So we employ more than 50% women, including more than 40% women in site-based roles. We also spend more than 20% of our annual expenditure with Supply Nations registered businesses, and we're 100% female-owned. So in terms of diversity and inclusion, we are good performers as well as the environmental and sustainability space. So a couple of recent success stories for me. I mentioned yesterday we recently partnered with WSP on what we believe is Australia's first ever on-site reuse of PFAS-contaminated soil. That project is a finalist for the Sustainability Award through Queensland Major Contractors Association later this month, so fingers crossed. Another recent success story, we won a QMCA award again last year for collaboration with Fulton Hogan and Seymour White. Now, that particular project encountered, as many projects did at the time, encountered issues with PFAS contamination in compost. What we ended up doing was getting an environmental license in Queensland, which allows us to compost on any site in Queensland, green waste that's been stripped from the site, to use it as part of their soil amelioration process back on that site again. So we developed that composting license with the Queensland regulator. There'd never been a license like that is Queensland-wide issued in Queensland and issued in an environment where the regulator was cracking down on liquid waste and PFAS contamination in compost. And that project won a collaboration award through QMCA.
Great, thank you. I might go to Dennis next. Same question, Dennis.
Thank you.
You're on mute. There you go.
Geofabrics is a Australian manufacturer. We are in the business of geosynthetics, which is a range of products that are used in building large-scale infrastructure. So I really think the road network, rail, mining. We do a lot of work in landfills and coastal protection. So our core pillars as a business is really about local content. So we employ over 350 people in Australia and in New Zealand. We use Australian-sourced recycled material to build our products, and our other key pillar is technical excellence. So a key part of what we do is all about R&D and innovation, and that's largely around sustainability. So looking at how we can use recycled content and looking at how we can lighten our footprint and also our customers' footprint on the environment. In terms of wins, two examples come to mind. In 2020, we developed Australia's first geotextile. So it's a textile material that incorporates Australian recycled PET plastics. And in 2 years, that product has taken 20 million plastic drinking bottles out of landfill and out of our waterways, and put them back into a product that builds our infrastructure. So once again, road, rail, mining, etc. And the other win, which is quite recent, is in 2021, Geofabrics was recognised as Australia's most innovative company for developing, right here in Australia, a geosynthetic that contains PFAS and other emerging contaminants. That is another bit of evidence in regards to local R&D, local manufacturing, and also creating jobs here in Australia. Thank you, Philip.
Thanks, fantastic. Thanks, Dennis. Cyril.
I'm Cyril. I'm the head of sustainability for Holcim. Holcim globally, we produce construction materials, primarily cement actually, but also concrete aggregates and precast concrete, and we're just expanding on sustainable solutions with roofing solutions. In Australia, we're very much focused on concrete, precast concrete and aggregates. It's been a fascinating journey for Holcim, the organization, both globally and in Australia, with very strong commitment. One of the first organizations to have to sign a pledge for net zero by 2050, having our targets SBTI validated for both 2030 and 2050, which is a great ambition. And locally, and I talked about this yesterday for the people here, but we launched EcoPact last year, which is our low carbon concrete range. And this has been a fantastic turning point for us because we started our journey with first. So we were the first to publish an EPD for ready-mix concrete in Australia. We then were the first to gain climate active for carbon neutral concrete in Australia. And now we have that range with summarize and make it really easy with a reduction of embodied carbon from 30 to 60%. Kind of the easiness of the message on how we provide sustainability solutions to the market and in the procurement space, it's very important, has been very successful. But I think we're talking about success stories, and obviously we very much focused on the climate emergency, but in the procurement space, we also last year partnered with supply nations, and we've had more than $10 million of contracts with Aboriginal corporations. And I think when we talk about sustainability, and this is probably our challenge moving forward, is we can be really good at addressing the climate solution, and I think we're going to continue to push the boundaries in that space. But how are we going to integrate these other very key aspects? We talked about working with our communities, working with the land that we operate on, but also things like nature, biodiversity, and circular economy.
What a great panel of innovative companies and great stories. Thanks for sharing those. So that's the positive. What we're here to explore, though, is some of the challenges in the procurement process and certainly the impact of not only the pandemic, but floods and fires and geopolitical tensions around the world, and even now, since the conference was organised, unfortunately, war in Europe. So how do we make our supply chains more resilient? What do we need to do to change the procurement process? And maybe in thinking that through, what are some of the pain points you're seeing today? What are the things we could do differently? Maybe go with Dennis first this time.
So I think there's always a risk for people to talk it down, and I think we've actually done a lot in the last few years as a country. And as a community, and when you look at the National Waste Policy Action Plan that has a near total ban on exporting recyclables overseas, so plastic waste and paper, glass and tyres, etc. So I think that really does open up the opportunity for greater investment in creating more feedstock. So, and I see that working well in terms of investment really there to allow us to process more recycled content. I think from my perspective, being very much embedded in an industry that builds infrastructure, I think we don't have enough coming out the other ends in terms of finding applications for what will become more and more recycled material in Australia. And that's where a company like Geofabrics comes in, where we invest heavily in R&D to find applications for recycled material. And if I wanted to be a touch critical, whilst I'm very supportive of the framework that government has created, and it's wonderful both at the state and federal level, but we do need to create a little bit more incentive for Australian companies to innovate, to find applications for recycled material. The R&D concessions, and particularly the changes that have been made to intensity levels in the last 2 years, doesn't really create any incentive to make investment decisions that a company is prepared to take greater risk because there's a little bit of a reward there with an R&D incentive at the end of that investment decision. So I think government policy is great, but for a company such as Geofabrics that competes exclusively against Asian imports, largely against Asian imports, there's no other manufacturer in town. It's a big ask to try to keep that model working at the same time of promoting local infrastructure and investing in R&D to make it all fit. So I think there's a challenge for local companies employing local people to continue to invest with an eye on sustainability, when that downstream incentive is not as big as it could be.
Thanks, Dennis. Might go to Cyril next.
Well, I think starting with the positive, because you were mentioning COVID and the COVID crisis, I would believe that everyone in the room at the beginning of the crisis would have thought, what does that mean for sustainability? Does that mean that we are actually not going to, this is going to be put on the back burner, or are we actually going to have a recovery led by sustainability or with sustainability at its core? And looking back at what's happened in the last 2 years, I'm very pleased to see that conversations around sustainable solutions, whether it's with embodied carbon or recycled content or how we partner with our communities, has been definitely increasing, and the expectations on organizations like us has been increasing, which is really, really good to see. Now, some of the challenges that we have, though, is the way the procurement processes and policies are being developed. We still have very much the way we've always been done. So having new solutions being introduced in procurement has been difficult. There are solutions existing today, and I think our 3 organizations represented today are a demonstration of this. But the demand is still something that we are working on. We're spending a lot of time educating people, sharing our stories and our success stories. But the way it transfers in procurement doesn't always work. So we can still see in procurement processes areas being very prescriptive rather than outcome-based, and that's not necessarily conducive to have good solutions being put on the market and being adopted. This is where I think government's got a lot to play, setting very strong procurement guidelines on how to take on more sustainable solutions as part of their projects. We have seen in our space, in the concrete space, and because we're working a lot with embodied carbon, that specification and outcome-based has been definitely a pain point. We still see us being mandated to replace X amount of cement rather than saying, you need to reach that number of embodied carbon, where the product is available today. We can do that, but we are constrained by this.
Excellent. Thank you. Alison?
Sure. So 13 years ago, when I first started trying to sell environmental things into construction projects, it wasn't very trendy at the time, and I knew that if I wanted to sell an environmental solution, I'd have to work out a way to frame it where it was a cheaper solution as well. So I do have that luxury of being, generally speaking, a much cheaper option, often up to half the cost of importing topsoil compared to making it from waste on site. And that's always been our motto all the way through, is we sell sustainability, but you don't use sustainability to sell sustainability, unfortunately. As we've progressed and dealt with bigger projects, I still don't have the luxury of selling what we do to enviros and sustainability professionals. I'm still selling to engineers, which is numbers. And those engineers, sometimes there's an enviro on the project who's really got a lot of influence and built a lot of influence on that project and kind of worked in the trenches and is quite well respected and has a bit more sway, but generally speaking, it's still a numbers game. So in Queensland and a couple of the other states, New South Wales now has one too, there's some specifications developed by government for government projects, which are all about recycling soil on their projects, and they're starting to make a difference. But they are quite prescriptive. There are basically a cheat sheet for what I would do for a private industry client who isn't government, who wants a guaranteed outcome. So if I'm going to give someone a guarantee, I follow that prescriptive process from the Queensland government. But those prescriptive processes, often the engineers on the ground don't understand the complexity of them and why that complexity is there, and that's where they fall down.
There's a lot of local content in your respective work. There's also a lot of opinion out there that being sustainable costs more. What can we collectively do to support your businesses to actually get the message out there and overcome some of those barriers practically? We'll go with Alison first this time.
I think for us, generally speaking, if my version of sustainability is costing more, I'm probably not interested in doing that job. There's plenty of other sustainable jobs I can do where I am saving the client money. But I think it's not so much about it costing more, but sometimes it's harder. It's so easy to get a variation and export waste soil off-site. It's harder to find a space to recycle it and go through the specifications and get the validation testing. It's a bit more effort, but it's not necessarily more expensive, for me at least.
Yeah. Cyril?
It's very complex for the concrete industry because if I look at embodied carbon, we've got control of only, let's say, 2 of the 8 pathways that have been identified to decarbonization. Yes, we can continue to push cement replacements. Yes, we can go towards renewable energy. But when we talk about building more with less, when we talk about changes on logistics, when we talk about innovation of carbon capture, for example, in the cement space, these are areas that are out of our control. And really supporting our business is having the ability at a very high level on looking at all along the supply chain and these other key influences that are essentially going to help us to get to that stage. And that's something that the decarbonization pathway for the cement and concrete industry in Australia, the report was only released last year in October 2021, so this is all brand new, but you have groups already thinking about this. MECLA, the Embodied Carbon Alliance, led by the New South Wales government, is looking at these questions, or where you bring together all the people through the supply chain to solve these questions and make proposals. At our level, at our local level, we've got local quarries, local batch plants, local communities, and local customers. So what we do is we do whatever we can to have this conversation very early in the process. And having this ability to explain what can be done very early at a design phase to include more sustainable solutions in that instance.
Thank you. Dennis?
I'll probably come back to the point I made before where I think there's a really solid developing framework around sustainability, and every state government has a local first policy. Every state government has a local recycling first policy. A promotion of Australian made, and more recently now by DOR, the remade Australia framework, the National Waste Policy Action Plan, and also the Recycling Modernisation Fund. So when you put all of that together, I think we should be quite pleased and encouraged that there really is a shift here that is positive for Australia. I want it to be just a touch critical right now. Whilst all of that momentum and all of that policy framework is in place, it probably lacks a little bit of teeth right at the end in terms of procurement by private enterprise, and maybe a little bit also by government. So, the framework's in place, there's an intent, you want to support Australian manufacturers, you want to create jobs in the sustainability space and using Australian sourced recycled material. But, from a Australian manufacturer point of view, as I said before, we find ourselves competing with imported products, and we fight on commercials, so we're not any more expensive than the next guy, but the incentive to continue to innovate and invest more and more in R&D becomes less so, because right now there's a heavy whack of infrastructure continues to be built with imported products, and even if it's imported and using recycled material, that recycled material is not Australian sourced recycled material. Local manufacturing, locally sourced recycled content creates jobs and makes sure as a community, the intent of that national waste policy action plan is fulfilled.
Thanks, Dennis. I hope somebody's noting down all the actions out of this panel today. There's a lot for us to do, but it's a good conversation. I think one of the great frustrations I've had in the infrastructure sector is that we still don't largely do post-completion reviews on our projects, looking at the benefits realisation or looking at how did the business case actually play out. That's still a great failing for us. From a sustainability point of view, how well are we measuring the sustainability outcomes from projects today? And kind of anticipating the answer to that, what are the kind of things do you think we should be measuring to move the needle on some of the issues that we're exploring in this panel? So maybe Alison first.
Sure. I think there's still a lot of greenwashing, unfortunately. There's a lot of painting things as environmental solutions that maybe aren't quite as environmentally friendly as they appear in the glossy marketing brochure. For me, I would particularly like to see a quantity of waste exported off-site. I know that a lot of the waste disposal companies provide recycling statistics, but I'd love to see some of my Enviro clients go and visit those waste disposal companies. So Soil Cyclers does work across the construction, the waste and the mining industries, and we're often involved in running the landfill's resource recovery area. Now, what passes for resource recovery in a landfill setting is quite different to what I would term recycling. Maybe if some of those enviros and sustainability people were out there on site having a much closer look, there might be a bit of a rethink about what is going off site and where it's going to.
Thanks, Cyril.
For us, and coming back to the embodied carbon piece, having very clear targets of how we are going to decrease embodied carbon in infrastructure is going to be really critical to push us to innovate, to push us to provide more solutions to the customers, and to embed this in our procurement processes. What we see now, I mean, for us, our journey and what we started was this environmental product declaration. What we are doing with cement replacement is not new in the industry. Measuring it and pushing the boundary to get it lower is new. And I think there's a fantastic opportunity for us to take these type of initiatives on board to push for progress and get these targets down, essentially.
Thanks. Dennis?
Look, I think, when it comes to building infrastructure, the audit framework, the specifications, the compliance, it's all part of what we do every day. What we don't see is a level of audit at the end of the job, at the end of the project, in regards to how green really is that project, and how green are the products that have gone into building that project. So I think some level of audit and checking beyond just measurement and reporting is interesting. And I'll give you an example. Something that Geofabrics does with its customers, just to take them on a journey of sustainability. When we sell geotextile into a road project or a rail project, we effectively give them the ability to calculate the equivalent number of plastic drinking bottles that they've just taken out of landfill or they've just taken out of our waterways, in making that a procurement decision to use a green geotextile rather than just a geotextile made from 100% virgin material. And I think that's increasingly useful. People do want to see some level of success, some level of measurement, and to make it tangible. So when we talk about sustainability, to actually make it tangible to something that people understand. And once again, the number of plastic bottles taken out of landfill resonates with a lot of people, but we still see projects getting built not using Australian material and certainly not using Australian source recycled material, and it'll be interesting to overlay a level of audit just merely beyond measurement and reporting at the conclusion of those projects.
Thanks. That's a really good example. If we focus back on the procurement process, one of the risks, of course, is that governments overspecify the procurement process, and engineers, and I'm an engineer, so I can say this, and engineers over-engineer the solution, and we actually restrict the opportunities or constrain the opportunities for innovation. What are some of the things you think we should be specifying in our procurement processes to actually drive better outcomes without over constraining things? Maybe Dennis, do you want to go first on this one?
Philip, look, I think, as I said before, I think a connection of sustainability to local content, creating jobs is
I think we've lost the connection with Dennis, so I might go to Alison.
Sure.
You've got to answer for him, though.
Okay. I can't answer for Dennis. I just do soil. I've actually seen both. So I'll answer this one from a topsoil and a revegetation perspective on projects. I've seen projects with prescriptive specifications. This is the steps you have to take to do the thing. And those specifications, sometimes they're followed, sometimes they're not. Just depends on the rep and whether they're, many of the reps are more interested in the bitumen and the earthworks than they are in the revegetation. Then I've also seen projects where there's no spec, it's just an outcome, achieve an outcome. And sometimes that works well, and sometimes it doesn't. Sometimes you get we call them sellers of magic water. There's a lot of sellers of magic water in the rehabilitation space. Lots of different magic waters. Some of them work, some of them don't. Some of them proven, some of them not. And it's great to see that innovation coming through, but I get offered magic waters to sell to my clients every day, and not all of them are as effective as they claim to be. So when you have an outcome-based specification, it does open the door for many untested products, which can be a good thing if you get a good product, but it can be a bad thing if you've been sold some magic water that maybe isn't overly magic. But then it relies on the client or the asset owner to actually enforce it. And often they're under pressure to open the road. Even if the landscaping's not finished, open the road because the road is finished. And it never gets done. So it's a real balancing act, and I don't have a good answer for you, unfortunately. It relies, I think, on the ethics and the contractor to be pushing themselves to do a really good job.
And probably setting, back to the earlier conversation, setting those outcome metrics that mean you've got to finish the job. Cyril?
Yeah, I mean, there's definitely that pressure of how much specify in the specification stage, how much prescriptive do you have to be? And in the concrete space, it's very interesting when you say, I'm going to replace 30% of your cement. That doesn't necessarily mean that your embodied carbon is lowered by 30%. And you can have a very clear target in your specification that doesn't actually lead to the outcome that you want. And this is where the shift needs to be for us, we believe anyway, very much outcome based. We see very much like you, Alison, there's sometimes these prescriptions work, sometimes they lead to the wrong outcome, and sometimes and more we've got the opportunity to work very early on, not with the contractor, but with the customer, and develop the solution together. There's fantastic examples out there. We've worked with Inland Rail for carbon neutral solutions in precast. Very recently, we worked with Universal Stores to develop also an eco-pack mix for their floors for one of their warehouses. And all these conversations were mainly because there was a very good sustainability person in charge in the customer space. This is still a very much a big driver. And we have this conversation at a technical level around how we can push performance. But we've seen that collaboration is very much absolutely key to be on the top of the specification. Specification alone has not yet driven to great outcome.
Welcome back, Dennis.
Thank you, Philip. And just a few technology problems, so I apologise.
No problem at all. Did you want to say any more on that point?
Look, I guess the point I'll make is I think the risk of over-specifying or thinking that sustainability is going to be a constraint on innovation is probably not the main game. I think we need to really promote local content. And I'm not a political sort of person, but the US President yesterday in the State of the Union really laid on a very strong message about supporting local American manufacturing, and I think that's what we need to do in Australia. And once again, the framework, whether it's local or federal, is already in place, so that's wonderful. But when it comes to procurement decisions, I think there's a little bit more that needs to be done just to give a little bit more of a boost to connecting local jobs, local content with using Australian source recycled material. So I think taking the narrative down the path of over-specification, constraining innovation is something I think is not really the main game at this point in time.
Thanks, Dennis. Now, were there any questions in the room? I'm allowed to take questions from the room? Here we are. Thank you. There's so many. Here's one. This is from Philippa S. Aside from the climate active certification, is Holcim working to develop a carbon neutral concrete product without purchasing offsets?
That's a
great question.
That's an excellent question. We're talking about this earlier, actually, without steel frames. Sorry. There is no doubt that, from a Holcim perspective, but also an industry perspective, in Australia and globally, there is a very strong commitment to decarbonisation and net zero without the need to purchase offsets. But obviously, this is in the long term, and this would involve new technology, especially with carbon capture. In the meantime, though, there is for us that ability to use these offsets, which are a tool that we can use. And I am pleased to see that the Australian government is reinforcing the credibility of the offset and the rules around the offset. Last year, there was an announcement by the Federal Minister around a minimum of 20% of Australian offset being used as part of the program. And for us, who are registered with or certified by Climate Active, it's very important that this offset have this credibility. What we want to do, though, and what we want to make sure is before we offer offsets to a customer, we push that reduction first, and this is where the EPD is instrumental. We measure, we reduce, and then we offer the ability to offset. And we believe that what we're pushing for anyway is to continue to push that boundary as low as possible, and the offset will remain a fantastic tool in the meantime to get carbon neutral solutions. But unfortunately, to have true carbon neutrality without offsets, this is the pathway, the longer pathway that the industry is following, and very committed to it.
Thank you. We've got another question from Nidhi T. I might get Alison and Dennis to answer this. Are there any successful project examples where recycling outcomes have exceeded expectations?
So I think the project I mentioned earlier with CR2SM that we won a collaboration award for with Fulton Hogan and Seymour White. That particular project, we were trying to fix an environmental problem, but in the process of that, with the PFAS contamination, but in the process of that, we also saved them many millions of dollars. We took a lot of trucks off the roads around the project because we were sourcing the compost and making the compost on site that was being added into their soil. And they didn't have to dispose of a lot of green waste. They had excess green waste on that project as well. So huge win environmentally, but also financially, definitely.
Yeah. Did you have an example on that, Dennis? Exceeding expectations.
I think, as I mentioned before, the creating for geofabrics a geotextile that uses Australian source recycled plastics from March of 2020 to February of 2022, 20 million plastic drinking bottles taken out of the environment. In addition to that, we also have a plastic pipe product made in Australia that is made from 100% recycled HDPE. So, in terms of real projects, think about the summer months when you see road repair work being done throughout every state in Australia. A very, very strong level of that resurfacing work is now using a geotextile made in Australia that now uses Australian source recycled material, and that wasn't there 2 years ago. So this is where I think we need to focus on the successes, because there are many. Road infrastructure, rail infrastructure, our tier 1 mining companies in terms of BHP, Rio Tinto, Fortescue, they're all on board with building their infrastructure using recycled content, and so we're seeing that now play out in a range of segments, but roads are the obvious one.
Thanks, Dennis. I might ask Cyril this question. The question is from Steph Rich, and the question is: there's a lot of subcontractors on our projects now. How do you ensure that these project partners create a sustainable supply chain?
And talked about collaboration before, but this is coming back to that too. It's been very interesting in the organization to see how the level of conversations from us to the contractor has now evolved to having everyone involved to implement some of these solutions. I talked about working directly from the customer and the designer and architects, but from subcontractors on site. There actually is still a lot of myths out there that sustainable solutions are actually not practical to implement, are very expensive, are not going to perform the same, and these are myths, right? And we do need to have these conversations to involve everyone and say, well, actually, no, we can work with everyone so that to demonstrate that an EcoPact mix, for example, is going to perform and behave exactly the same way that another mix.
Yeah.
So collaboration, involvement, discussion, level of awareness is absolutely key there. And obviously all through the supply chain. So it has to come from us as the supplier, but it also has to come from the customer and the contractor.
Yeah. Just, we've probably got 5? We've got 5 minutes. Thanks, Ron. This is a question from Baron Law, and I might ask Alison this one. And it picks up on your final point there, Cyril, around what kind of policy, are there some policy changes you'd like to see from all tiers of government to actually influence investment decisions on sustainability and drive better outcomes? Is there a magic bullet there with a policy change from your perspective? Dennis, I'll ask you the same question, so you're on notice for that.
At least Dennis gets a little bit longer to think. I think there is no magic bullet. There's definitely things that government can do to push and insist on recycling and recycled content. And governments they're putting Infrastructure Sustainability Council ratings, they're mandating them for their projects. That's a great first step. Then in their specifications, they can push a bit more for recycled content, for local content, for sustainability outcomes as well. But then it really comes down to the contractors running the jobs, and those contractors really striving to do things to lift our game and to collaborate and work together to do a lot better. We're making progress, but probably not fast enough. And it's going to require all of us at all levels to maybe stop worrying about the risk and that risk-based contracting and start collaborating more effectively to achieve better outcomes.
Thanks, Alison. Dennis, you've got a bit more time.
Frozen.
He's frozen in time.
To your point, Alison, you mentioned infrastructure projects having to adopt the IS rating a lot more, and that's there might not be a magic bullet at a government level, but the importance of sustainability rating schemes is paramount. I mean, we in this room and we all actors of the supply chain are together around one theme about an IS rating, and there is a strong power to influence that way. It pushes us as suppliers to come up with new solutions, and it provides the ability for all these projects and infrastructure builders to understand what's out there.
Agreed. Dennis, any magic bullet or policy lever that we should be thinking about? He's still frozen. Right, so might draw a line under proceedings there. So I think that this has been a super panel and really, great stories. I think really great conversation around what we can do around measuring outcomes and really helping influence this transformation that we're seeing. And thanks to the panelists for not only for being on the panel today, but also the great work your businesses are respectfully doing. And I also wanted to just acknowledge Ainsley and her team for the last 10 years of great work, and thanks for bringing everyone together for these conversations yesterday and today. And keep safe, everyone, and enjoy the rest of the day. Thank you.
Thanks.